Good morning, friends. Coming to you via video this morning, as it's a great way for me to be able to preach, but also be fully present on Sunday mornings. It's better for my brain that way. That way I can still talk and hug you and be there and just be part of our experience together, which I'm really grateful for. So thank you for the grace to continue to do this in this way in my recovery from post-concussion syndrome. Or maybe I'm just doing it so I can preach in my yoga pants and you won't know. Dun, dun, dun. Just kidding. Or am I? Just so you know, there's an update coming up later in the worship service about my progress and what to expect with Salt House moving forward these next few months. So here we go. Let's dive in. My friends, a word about prophets. Prophets, man. So every people and place and era throughout time has its prophets. Prophets are those who call out what's happening, what's not happening, those who see the holy in things that so many of us fail to see, those who so often speak with the voice of God as they speak of how things really are, who shake and rattle things up, who call out to the masses. Prophets are always with us, and we're mindful of this, having just observed the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday this past week, right? Freshly aware of how we still have this need to listen to our prophets of our current day who continue the needed cry for racial justice. And the thing about prophets is that prophets are also always poets. And many of us are aware that one of the greatest American poets of our time died this last week. And this poet is so clearly also a prophet. One of the great prophets of our time, too. Indeed, prophets are always poets. And of course, I'm speaking of Mary Oliver. You are someone who has enjoyed her poetry and her prophecy, whether or not you realize it. She is someone who's often quoted by people across ages and across backgrounds, which is fitting since she described poetry as a sacred community ritual. I love that. Mary died on January 17th at the age of 83. She was a prolific and decorated poet whose honors included the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. And my friends, for Mary Oliver's death to happen now in the midst of our series on prayer, it would seem a bit negligent for us to not stop to listen and make room for her prophetic voice as prayer among us, yes? And so this Sunday at Salt House right now, this is Mary Oliver Sunday. It's also Jesus Sunday and a few other things woven in too. But we'll speak about Mary's life and her context. We'll hear her poems. We'll lift up a moment in Jesus' life, and then we'll invite all of us into a response to all of that. So it's a different kind of feel that we have for this time that we share together as we make room for this prophet and poet. Are you ready? Awesome. So, just for a little bit of context, Mary Oliver grew up in Ohio, and during a painful childhood, she walked through the woods outside her home for solace, escaping the tumult of her home and the tumult of her family. She talks about how those woods saved her life. She was saved by those woods and saved by poetry. In those woods, she began writing her first poems at the age of 10. Her poetry became, for her and for us, a persistent guide to the natural world and at the same time to the spiritual, drawing us into her woods, drawing us in to see how the natural world and the spiritual are there together when we stop like her, attentive with pen and notebook in hand to capture what is right in front of us. She's been compared to Emerson, who also wove together nature and beauty and God. In Mary's adult life, she spent it in Cape Cod with her longtime partner, Molly, who preceded Mary in death. Molly and Cape Cod and their dog, Percy, are also frequent subjects in her poems. So let's listen to a few of Mary Oliver's poems now, beginning with the first few minutes of a reading that Mary Oliver gave in 2015 in New York at the 92nd Street Y. So this clip, it's a bit more than just her reading, but I chose it because it's fun. It gives us a chance to get to know her personality a bit too. So in this particular reading, she's reading from her book at that time, that was new at that time, 1,000 Mornings. So I invite you to roll those shoulders back and take a deep breath, hold it, get those synapses ready to fire as we open up and listen together, pretending for a moment that we're there too at this poetry reading with Mary Oliver.
I'm going to read mostly this evening poems from the new book, A Thousand Mornings, which is from my new publisher, Penguin. Hurrah! And I also now have an agent, Charlotte Sheedy. Hurrah! So I'm a happy camper. I also have a very, very bad cold. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Good. And I think that I'll be pretty good. They gave me water. And, I've never apologized, but if I cough and break a poem, I'll start over and so forth. But things could be worse. I remember reading once with Grace Paley in Indiana, and when she got on stage, she said, "Well, we'll have to see how it goes. I just ate supper, and I ate the toothpick." No toothpick could get Grace Paley down, for sure. I'm going to start off with poems from the new book after a very short poem that I have been reading lately to start the reading, and I still continue it. It's called Percy. Our new dog, named for the beloved poet, ate a book which unfortunately we had left unguarded. Fortunately, it was the Bhagavad Gita, of which many copies are available. Every day now, as Percy grows into the beauty of his life, we touch his wild, curly head and say, "Oh, wisest of little dogs." It's that second ripple I like. The first poem in A Thousand Mornings is what I call my misery poem. I'm not miserable. I won't say I've never been miserable, but this is, once in a while I'm miserable. Who isn't? I go down to the shore. I go down to the shore in the morning, and depending on the hour, the waves are rolling in or moving out, and I say, "Oh, I am miserable. What should I do?" And the sea says in its lovely voice, "Excuse me, I have work to do." All right, something more serious. Where did I put the one I wanted to read? Well, we'll figure it out. I make very careful lists, and then I put the wrong page numbers on, usually. This is a prose poem, and it's titled, "I Have Decided." I have decided to find myself a home in the mountains, somewhere high up where one learns to live peacefully in the cold and the silence. It's said that in such a place, certain revelations may be discovered, that what the spirit reaches for may be eventually felt, if not exactly understood. Slowly, no doubt. I'm not talking about a vacation. Of course, at the same time, I mean to stay exactly where I am. Are you following me? 53. Now I got you giggling. This too is from the new book, The Way of the World. The chickens ate all the crickets. The foxes ate all the chickens. This morning, a friend hauled his boat to shore and gave me the most wondrous fish. In its silver scales, it seemed dressed for a wedding. The gills were pulsing just above where shoulders would be if it had shoulders. The eyes were still looking around. I don't know what they were thinking. The chickens ate all the crickets. The foxes ate all the chickens. I ate the fish. Very well. This is called The Mockingbird. I'll read it first and then I'll tell you something. All summer, the mockingbird in his pearl gray coat and his white windowed wings flies from the hedge to the top of the pine and begins to sing. But it's neither lilting nor lovely, for he is the thief of other sounds. Whistles and train brakes and dried hinges, plus all the songs of other birds in his neighborhood. Mimicking and elaborating, he sings with humor and bravado, so I have to wait a long time for the softer voice of his own life to come through. He begins by giving up all his usual flutter and settling down on the pine's forelock, then looking around as though to make sure he's alone. Then he slaps each wing against his breast where his heart is, and copying nothing, begins easing into it, as though it was not half so easy as rollicking, as though his subject now was his true self, which of course was as dark and secret as anyone else's, and it was too hard, perhaps you understand, to speak or to sing it to anything or anyone but the sky. I need a hot toddy.
Man, isn't she a hoot? So Mary Oliver, she actually offered very few interviews. She spoke rarely and seemed recluse in her avoidance of people that she didn't know, though she was really well known by the people in the town that she lived in. But one of the things that she named about how she changed over the years is that she said, "Now I know that I'm funny." And she is. Wasn't that lovely? So when Mary reflected on her childhood and her beginnings of faith specifically, this is what she said about that. She said, "I was sent to Sunday school, as many kids are, and then I had trouble with the resurrection. So I would not join the church, but I was still probably more interested than many of the kids who did enter the church. It's been one of the most important interests of my life and continues to be. It doesn't have to be Christianity. I'm very much taken with the poet Rumi, who is Muslim, a Sufi poet. I read him every day and have no answers, but have some suggestions. I know that a life is much richer with a spiritual part to it, and I also think nothing is more interesting, so I cling to it." Mary Oliver has themes of prayer throughout her poetry, both overtly and covertly, which is lovely for us to hold as we are in this series on prayer. And one of those overt prayer moments happens in the poem, "I Happened to Be Standing." This is also from her book, 1,000 Mornings. So we're going to listen to that now. This is just the audio of Mary reading her poem on the podcast On Being with Krista Tippett in 2015. So I invite you to close your eyes if you'd like to, as we hear "I Happen to Be Standing."
I don't know where prayers go or what they do. Do cats pray while they sleep half asleep in the sun? Does the opossum pray as it crosses the street? The sunflowers, the old black oak growing older every year? I know I can walk through the world along the shore or under the trees with my mind filled with things of little importance in full self-attendance, a condition I can't really call being alive. Is a prayer a gift or a petition? Or does it matter? The sunflowers blaze, maybe that's their way. Maybe the cats are sound asleep. Maybe not. While I was thinking this, I happened to be standing just outside my door with my notebook open, which is the way I begin every morning. Then a wren in the privet began to sing. He was positively drenched in enthusiasm. I don't know why. And yet, why not? I wouldn't persuade you from whatever you believe, or whatever you don't. That's your business. But I thought of the wrens singing. What could this be if it isn't a prayer? So I just listened, my pen in the air.
What could this be if it isn't prayer? She asks. Isn't this the question? Mary also said in that same interview with Krista Tippett, when she was asked about how her spiritual sensibilities have changed through her lifetime, she said, I've become kinder, more people-oriented, more willing to grow old. I always was investigative in terms of everlasting life, but a little more interested now, a little more content with my answers. Kinder and more people-oriented, more willing to grow old. I think that's what we would all hope for in our own journey. So now finally, let's finish with two of Mary Oliver's most beloved poems from that same video that we saw earlier, that video event at the 92nd Street Y. We step back into that poetry reading.
All right, I'm going to stop from the book now and read a couple of old poems, because if I don't, I get slapped. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Thank you. I can't whistle either. The summer day. See how good I am? Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
I told you that you have heard Mary Oliver's poetry before, yes? So perhaps Mary Oliver's greatest legacy can be distilled into these two words: pay attention. Attention runs through Mary's work, both the word itself and the practice of it. People associate her with that word. Maybe even with that image of her just moving through the woods, a pen and a notebook at the ready, but also ready to be still. I do know how to pay attention, she says. Attention is the beginning of devotion, she also says, which also sounds a whole lot like prayer. To pay attention, to direct our devotion, is at the heart of all religion at its best. The great task of religion is to keep us fully awake, alert, conscious. Unfortunately, that task has often been neglected historically in many churches and across traditions. But that is the task of religion. Mary Oliver's life embodies this, that when we are present, we will know the presence. It is that simple, and it is that hard. Throughout the Bible, we find this theme, and I want us to go to just one moment where Jesus says explicitly, pay attention. He's saying, stay awake. And we go to the Garden of Gethsemane to hear this. As Jesus has just finished the Last Supper with his disciples, his final meal with them, and he's just moments away from his betrayal by Judas and his arrest on his way to the cross. This is also one of Jesus's most remarkable moments of prayer, yes? So we hear part of that scene as our text for today, hearing it with the same openness that we received Mary Oliver's poetry. So don't shift into a different kind of listening, yes? So I invite Brianna to come on up to read as we hear Matthew 26, 36 through 41. And I invite you really just to envision it, be in it, just as we were with Mary Oliver's poetry.
Then Jesus went with them to a garden called Gethsemane and told his disciples, "Stay here while I go over there and pray." Taking along Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he plunged into an agonizing sorrow. Then he said, "This sorrow is crushing my life out. Stay here and keep vigil with me." Going a little ahead, he fell on his face praying, "My God, if there is any way, get me out of this. But please, not what I want. What do you want?" When Jesus came back to his disciples, he found them sound asleep. He said to Peter, "Can't you stick it out with me a single hour? Stay awake. Be in prayer so you don't wander into temptation without even knowing you're in danger. There is a part of you that is eager, ready for anything in God, but there's another part that's as lazy as an old dog sleeping by the fire."
So friends, let's hear this outside of the storyline of Jesus' journey to the cross and hear it and hold it as something more universal for us. These words, the last words Jesus spoke to his apostles before being arrested, were "stay awake." In fact, Jesus says it twice. In this particular translation, we hear it as "keep vigil with me" and "stay awake," but it's the same thing. He says "stay awake" twice. The Buddha offered the same wisdom. Buddha actually means "I am awake." This is the task of faith. Again, it is that simple and that hard. And Jesus here is naming just that, and we see it demonstrated in the disciples, how stinking hard it is to stay awake, and not just to not sleep. I mean, that's an issue sometimes, but to actually be present and awake in that sense, present to what is here and now. And to notice, too, here that Jesus names how we long for that. As he says, there is a part of you that is eager, ready for anything in God. Isn't that true? Our place in the family of things is the way that Mary Oliver says it, is this awoken place. But Jesus also says, there's another part that's as lazy as an old dog sleeping by the fire. Okay, Jesus, that seems a little bit harsh, but I think it's true, and I think it's actually very helpful. A dog sees a fire and an open hearth, and the default setting is to curl up and go to sleep, right? Jesus is getting at how we have these same kinds of default instincts all the time. Our autopilot. We're unaware, we're unawake. So to stay awake, to pay attention, it isn't just about mustering the willpower to see things outside of ourselves and tune into those things, but it's actually counterintuitively a call to pay attention to the habitual ways we encounter each and every moment, our lazy dog ways. Don't be a lazy dog, Jesus seems to say, but wake up. We begin to watch the way we read the moment. We all have preferred and practiced styles of attention that we're often asleep to. We must discover ours, what ours are, or we will not see things as they are, but rather we will see things as we are. It is a lifelong task, then, of what our Buddhist friends call mirror wiping, understanding that our internal world is will mirror onto whatever we are seeing outside of ourselves, however we're doing on the inside. So do you always get fired up when you get that email or a text from that one particular person? Interesting. Might be time to pay attention to what's happening in you, to pay attention to call out our default ways of seeing. Enter prayer. Prayer is a practice and posture that helps us to stay awake. We've named how prayer isn't about changing God's mind, though so often it's seen that way, but it's about changing us. And I think specifically it's about changing our minds. Prayer becomes that Control-Alt-Delete that we keep hitting over and over again to reset our default settings, to literally help rewire our brains to respond differently. That mirror wiping of our attention to be able to reflect back and pay attention. Because staying awake isn't just about the willpower, but it is a wholehearted surrender to the moment as it is. Not just through our autopilot, lazy dog ways. And prayer opens us up to that. If we can be present, we will experience God. It is an acceptance of the full reality of what is right here and now. That grasshopper snacking on sugar, that exuberant joy of a bird, the friend or child or partner that's here before us without our lens mirroring onto them our assumptions or our preoccupations, reflected back instead by a clean mirror of our attention. It is the task of our whole lifetime to sort this out. It was the task of Mary Oliver's life. So in response to all of this, we're going to make some space now to pray and to write. Space to be present to ourselves in this present particular moment that we're in right now. To practice being like Mary Oliver. So we're not in the woods with her. I think that'd be a lot easier in some ways. But we are here. You are here in this room, or you're listening online as you drive or jog or wash the dishes. But we're listening, we're here in this moment with a mirror that is colored, that is clouded by our present mood and experience. And we want to awaken to that. So we ask, what is the state of your mirror? What's clouding your mirror? What's affecting how you see and what you're reflecting back onto the world? This is a very active question for me in my life in this season of recovery from post-concussion syndrome. Sometimes my mirror feels like it's completely fogged with however I'm feeling this particular moment about my recovery. It's all that I can see through, reflected out onto everyone and everything else. Sometimes not so much. Last week was very fogged up, and this week my mirror has been clearer. Thanks, I think, in many ways to the time that I've spent with Mary Oliver this week. But I do know that my mirror, my default settings are often, sourced in my perfectionism. So reflecting out all kinds of shoulds to myself, to others. It's a mirror that's always wants to see myself and others getting better and growing and becoming. It is a mirror that doesn't default to grace. So I need to keep wiping it to let myself be present to what is, to let in more grace. But how about you? What is on your mirror? So I invite you to use that prayer that you have when you came in, or if you brought your journal, use that. This is really a moment of confession at its best, taking an honest look at ourselves, praying by being present in this moment in ourselves, staying awake We name what is, we call it the thing out, and we let it go. So the band's going to come back up. There will be some music as we take this time together. Keep making notes through the song, even through our time into Holy Communion and after. We make space to pay attention, to stay awake. So let's hear just one final word from Mary Oliver, just one line from one of her poems that I'll read. So just take one more breath with me. In her poem, When Death Comes, Mary writes, "When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement." The cost of not paying attention, she suggests, is to be a tourist in our own life and to never be at home. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world, she says. Neither do we. So we pay attention now. We wipe that mirror. We pray together.